Rules Committee, come to order, and thank you very much for joining us today. Today we are in the process of handling essentially three distinctly different pieces of legislation that will prepare the committee for its work during the weekend for floor activity. Today, the committee will consider Senate Amendment to H.R. 3249, the Project Safe Neighbors Grant Program Authorization Act of 2018. It's my understanding that this was a bill that's been completed by the United States Senate and the House with an amendment to that, and we're going to consider that amendment and then the bill. H.R. 8, the Water Resources Development Act of 2018, and H.R. 5895, the Energy, Water, and Development and Related Agencies Appropriations Act of 2019. That's what it says here, 2019. The Senate amendment to H.R. 3249, which we will discuss first, helps ensure that our communities are safe from gang violence, or at least safer. Many of us across the nation have been hit by and been a part of violent gang action in our local communities, and certainly as we understand them, they are across the nation. MS-13 gang is just one of several nationwide gangs that continues to plague not only our local communities, but have joined together to create a menace to federal and local law enforcement, but perhaps more importantly on those people that they prey upon. This bill will help steer federal resources toward the front lines and will help investigators and prosecutors of gang members. We think this is an important bill, and obviously this is why the distinguished young chairman of the Judiciary Committee is here today. H.R. 8, which we will also discuss, second, addresses the needs of America's harbors, docks, dams, flood protection, and other water resources infrastructure critical to the nation's economic competitiveness. Restoring certainty to the water process is important for our nation, and other countries continue to invest in their own water resources infrastructure. It's time that we continue to do the same with regular action. Action and oversight by Congress will ensure that the United States infrastructure is prepared for future growth and meeting global competition. Also, technology that helps America to be more competitive. H.R. 5895, which we will discuss last, combines three appropriations measures: energy and water, ledge grants, and Milcon VA. The package funds responsibly infrastructure and defense programs that are critical to our nation's economy and safety. This bill also ensures our military will have the resources it needs to respond to threats while ensuring that our veteran service members and families have the benefits and resources they deserve. Each year we enter into this discussion with the understanding that this is important for families that support our service members and their children and the infrastructure, which is so important. But before we go any further, I want to welcome the young chairman, Chairman Goodlatte, and subcommittee ranking member, Ms. Jackson Lee from Houston, Texas, from the Judiciary Committee for their hard work on H.R. 3249. I look forward to each of your opening statements. As you know, anything you've brought in writing today without objection will be entered in the record, so we appreciate you allowing your written comments that you brought to help our awesome stenographer in making sure that the record is properly stated. Now, I want to thank each of you for being here, but before we come to you, we're going to go to the distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts, ranking member of the committee, Mr. McGovern. Gentleman's recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think you accurately summarized what's on the agenda today. Most of what's on the agenda today are things that will get bipartisan support. We do have a problem with the energy and water appropriations bill, which again has been loaded up with a whole bunch of extraneous riders that we have strong objections to, but we'll get to that when we get to that. But I do want to recognize two guests, two new interns on the Democratic side of the Rules Committee who are here. Hope Claremont from Berlin, Massachusetts is here, and Rob Saylor from Amherst, Massachusetts is joining us for the summer. We welcome them, and we hope that after their experience in the Rules Committee, they still have a high opinion of Congress. So we'll do our best to make that the case. So with that, I welcome them and welcome our witnesses, and I yield back my time.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. We have a large number of students that are with us today, and we do want to go through and delineate them, including the New Rules Committee intern that is here also. But I'd like to, if I can, let us know, we also have Anders Darude, who is from St. Andrews, class of 2019. That's pretty cool. Katie Stalwart, Texas Christian University, class of 2021, and Brad Clendenning, SMU, class of 2020. I'm sure our communications director, as a pony who's graduated, had a lot to do with Brad being here, but we want to thank each of our students for being here, and we too hope that you have a high opinion of Congress and the Rules Committee when you sit through these opportunities for the summer. Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Chairman, we're delighted that you're here. Jim's recognized.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Sessions, Ranking Member McGovern. This bill is designed to combat gang violence and create safer neighborhoods. And as you noted, the legislation passed on suspension last March by voice vote. It is now returned to us with minor Senate amendments, and our goal is to get this bill to the President's desk. Our country has seen an increase in the most violent crimes in recent years, with much of this violence stemming from gang warfare. The number of gangs, gang membership, and gang homicides are on the rise. Indeed, according to recent statistics between 2010 and 2015, there was an 8% increase in the number of gangs, an 11% increase in the number of gang members, and a 23% increase in gang-related homicides. In order to address this violence, Attorney General Sessions recently announced plans to rejuvenate the successful program Project Safe Neighborhoods. Project Safe Neighborhoods began in 2001 as a nationwide commitment to reduce gun and gang crime in America by networking existing local programs that target gun and gun crime and providing these programs with the tools needed to be successful. It has previously been funded through appropriations of other grants. This bill will officially establish the Project Safe Neighborhoods grant program and help the Department of Justice rejuvenate it. The legislation will facilitate partnerships between federal, state, and local agencies, including the United States Attorney in each federal judicial district. It further provides the localities receiving grants under this program with control over how the funds are to be used to the extent practicable to ensure local law enforcement has the flexibility to put funds toward the problems they have identified within the parameters of the grant program. It also allocates 30% of the funds to regional task forces in areas with a significant or increased presence of criminal activity caused by gangs. The bill will authorize $50 million for each of the fiscal years 2019 through 2021. The Senate amendment makes a few minor changes. Notably, it requires the Department of Justice to collect data on outcomes achieved through the program. It also prioritizes investigation and prosecution of those in gang leadership roles. Further, while the House bill consolidated several programs into the Project Safe Neighborhoods program, the bill, as amended by the Senate, instead lists these programs as additional purpose areas. As I said, these are minor changes. They should not alter anyone's support for this bill. It is of the utmost importance that the dedicated men and women of law enforcement have the ability to reduce violent crime using all available means, including vigorous enforcement and community outreach. This legislation furthers this objective. I want to thank Ms. Comstock of Virginia for her leadership on this important legislation, and thank you for allowing me to testify.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Jackson-Lee, we're delighted that you're here. The gentlewoman's recognized.
Thank you very much. Chairman is correct. This bill has had bipartisan support as it went through the House and offered by Ms. Comstock. And so I'm here to discuss H.R. 3249, the Project Safe Neighborhoods Grant Program Act of 2017, which would provide additional resources to help local jurisdictions prevent and fight crime in their communities. The bill would authorize the Attorney General to establish and implement a program to be known as the Project Safe Neighborhoods Block Grant Program within the Office of Justice Programs at the Department of Justice, thereby providing a formal authorization for Project Safe Neighborhoods program currently implemented by DOJ. Many of the programs are in need of authorization. 30% of the funding awards under the program would be allocated to fighting gang-related crime. While I support authorizing this program, I'd like to highlight two concerns as I did in the markup of this bill. First, a substantial portion of the funding under this bill would be dedicated to anti-gang task forces. I support preventing and fighting crime, no matter who the perpetrator may be. But I must caution against targeting groups of young people who are not engaged in crime. Under the current framework, innocent young people will likely become targets in light of the focus on MS-13s. We know how young people are, how they gather in groups, and I want to be very clear that we want to turn young people away from crime and activity and not toward it. We must not use law enforcement as a means to target individuals based solely on the ethnicity or national origin. Far too often, the rhetoric that we have in trying to pump up the fighting against gangs sometimes has forms of racial bias. That is why I had hoped to offer an amendment to the Senate version which would reflect the original and much better provision as intended by Representative Comstock. This amendment does two things. It ensures that funding will be allocated justly based on sincere need and not on the idea of overreach as it relates to young people allegedly involved in criminal organizations. And it ensures funding will be used in areas where a concentration of targeted groups are, as defined by the statute, are located, and eliminate vague terms for groups of people not defined by statute, but instead defined based on biases or enhanced analysis launched at a particular class of people. We cannot ignore that unfortunate reality of current times. We must also commit to fighting crime, protecting our neighborhoods, and giving our law enforcement the right kinds of tools. We talk to most police officers, as I do on a regular basis. They want to save and help our young people, and they want to get the bad guys. Therefore, in addition to introducing legislation, we must be vigilant in conducting oversight of the use of program funds and in protecting against any overreach. Second, I have serious concerns about the provisions that would prevent funding for fiscal years 2018 through 2022. Number one, competitive and evidence-based programs to reduce gun crime and gang violence. Number two, an Edward Byrne Memorial Criminal Justice Innovation Programs and community-based violence prevention programs, initiatives, and gang and youth violence education, prevention, and intervention-related activities would not have funding during this period of time. That is why I would offer a second amendment, if I could, to amend the Crime Control, and I have submitted those amendments, but to amend the Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968 to allow for strong emphasis on gang prevention programs, which is key to curtailing much of these problems. It is imperative that to provide front-end mechanisms that will prevent the back-end solutions that result in both human costs and tax dollars for our prisons. This amendment is practical, inexpensive, and embraced by both sides. The present bill authorizes $50 million for each, $50 million, excuse me, for each of the fiscal years 2019 to 2021, totaling $150 million. Although the majority proposes this legislation, they have waived its compliance with the cut-go requirements so that the $50 million may be authorized. I would argue, with respect to my legislation, which focuses on anti-bullying, anti-gang, and intervention prevention, would be equally complementary to this effort. The program would be but one facet of DOJ's efforts to address gun and gang violence at the local, state, and tribal levels. We should view it from the holistic perspective and as an effort to supplement but not supplant alternatives that may employ different yet still effective approaches. During the committee's consideration of H.R. 3249, we expressed these funding concerns and urged that these funding prohibitions be eliminated. I support providing a formal authorization for the Project Safe Neighborhoods, but respectfully request consideration of my two amendments and caution against its possible overreach. Restricting the funding of alternative public safety programs, I believe, is unnecessary and would be counterproductive. I ask my colleagues to consider the thoughts that I've expressed, and with that, I yield my time.
Thank you very much. Chairman Goodlatte, there's been a discussion that Ms. Jackson Lee has just brought to the committee, and that is some, at least, beginning of an argument that our law enforcement might not be as, she didn't say it, but busy enough to where they would deal with people that were not committing crimes, people that just may be standing around. And I have had an opportunity to ride pretty often with U.S. Marshals, with the Richardson Police Department, Richardson, Texas, and Dallas Police Department. And they have told me that these gangs and gang associates have colors that they wear, they have markings that they have on their bodies, that they are pretty well established and known. They mark their territory, they know where their lines are, and they know where the intersections come. It's not really a guess, and that these people run in these areas and that they're easy to find, because really, they're really not afraid many times of law enforcement. Do we stand a chance of overdoing this?
I don't think so. This is a very, very serious problem. There are thousands and thousands of gang members in the country, and $150 million is a good start at this, but it's not an amount of money that I think is being in any way wasted. I've ridden with police. I've stopped when they've stopped to talk to people out on the streets, including people who may or may not be gang members. I think it's a good thing that they do that. They shouldn't be targeting people who are not engaged in criminal activities, but for law enforcement to have good relationships with youth in these communities is important, and I think this also helps to promote that. And then the regional task forces, I've also had the opportunity to work with them, and I think that they provide an essential ingredient of allowing a wide array of local law enforcement organizations. Just looking at Virginia, we have 160, 170 cities and counties in the state. They need to have cooperation between themselves, state law enforcement, the state police, and federal law enforcement. And these task forces help to promote that, promote communications, coordination. So I think the bill is well targeted. There are always more things that can be done. I understand the view of the gentlewoman, but this is something that we've passed through the House. The Senate has now passed it, and I think it's important that we get it to the President to sign into law.
Yes, sir, and thank you very much. I think my point is that I think that local law enforcement, at least in the areas that I have been in, were acutely aware of who the people were, what their association was, what their viewpoint or crimes that might be perpetrated, how they would do those, their method of operation, and they were really looking for help, data and information that would suggest perhaps gangs that are engaged in transporting guns, transporting drugs, transporting people, transporting stolen items, cars, motorcycles, and other valuable items back and forth on an interstate basis, which then brought that into a federal realm of interstate theft, stolen property. And that is what we see from what I don't call Dallas a large city. We're only the 10th largest city in the country, but it's large enough to where they found themselves in the middle of an international and national gang operation. And so I think this is exactly what would be necessary, data, information, and gathering things. So I appreciate you doing this, and would thank the gentlewoman from Virginia for bringing this forward, Ms. Comstock, to get this important bill passed. And I appreciate the time that both of you have taken to be here, to be in support, but with the idea that we're trying to better the bill, knowing that the Senate has now done their work.
Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Yes, ma'am.
I appreciate your characterization, and I think both of us agree that I was not talking about those who might be just standing around. None of us can survey all of the utilization of these dollars all across the nation in every single jurisdiction. And so my caution is that there was an expanse on the Senate amendment. It wasn't the original intent of Ms. Comstock on some of the opportunities that it would be to round up individuals who were not directly MS-13s or the violent gangs that we're thinking. I raise a caution that in addition to that focus, the data collection is extremely important. But in addition to that, let us make sure that we are not including individuals who are not the violent gangs, gun runners that is intended by this bill for law enforcement. And then secondarily, you have some programs that obviously we're putting on hold. And then I would offer an amendment to say that let's do programming that deals with gang prevention and intervention and anti-bullying, because you need to have as much on the front end as you now have on the back end, which is what this is. These, besides the MS-13s, you know, there's some areas that don't have MS-13s. They have other types of gang activity. And if you talk to your police officers in many jurisdictions, they'll come up with many different names of groups that they have to deal with. And they do admit, maybe it's the old-fashioned police athletic league, but they do admit that having programs on the front end are very important, very constructive. I thought that was a very important point to make on this kind of work that we're doing, because I truly believe that our best approach to juvenile justice is to stop juveniles from engaging in this kind of violent and gun activity.
Yes, ma'am. In fact, I did want to characterize your bill as better in the bill. Your ideas is better in the bill. And I thank the gentleman, gentlewoman for that clarification. Chairman Cole?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any questions. I just want to thank both these great members for the wonderful bipartisan job they did on this bill and working across the rotunda with our friends in the Senate as well. So thank you very much, and look forward to supporting the bill when it reaches the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Chairman, I have no questions. I support Ms. Jackson-Lee's request for amendments, and I'll yield back my time.
Thank you very much. Judge Hastings. Judge Hastings did not seek time, but very supportive of the gentlewoman coming here and making a pitch for bettering the bill. Thank you very much. The distinguished gentleman from Alabama. Gentleman does not seek time. I want to thank both of you very much. In fact, I think this legislation that has been brought forward was done on a bipartisan, bicameral basis. There are always things that I think we can add to a bill, but I'm pleased that it shows that the relationship of trying to aim at a problem that is a problem for people back home is being addressed. I want to thank both of you very much for your time. If you'll please make sure that you leave anything you brought in writing for awesome stenographer to enable her to complete the record. Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for your time.
Yes, ma'am. The next opportunity we have, the distinguished gentleman, the young chairman from the state of Pennsylvania, gentleman Chairman Schuster, to talk with the committee about Water Resources Development Act of 2018, H.R. 8. Mr. Chairman, we've already acknowledged that you would be here. Previously, we spoke about you, and without objection, anything you brought in writing will be into the record. And as long as the gentleman has a green light on his microphone, the gentleman's recognized.
As long as the gentleman gives me a green light.
Yes, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member McGovern, and the committee members. Thanks for considering H.R. 8, the Water Resources Development Act of 2018. I first have to start off by saying that the Rules Committee staff has always been excellent to work with. You've got a great team here on both sides of the aisle. But Chairman Sessions, you have just made a great addition to your team, been one Colin McHugh. And I look back there, normally Colin's standing a little bit behind me, so I never get a really good look at it. But man, that's a good looking haircut, Colin. And I have to say that because on Friday he was with the T&I committee, and today, the first time in a Rules Committee hearing, I'm honored that he's sitting there. You know, you can wink at me or nod or shake your head no if I'm not making the saying the right things, Colin. But you really have added somebody great to your team, and to explain to him, he works hard, he's smart, he's not bad looking, he's got a great haircut. But the best way to describe Colin that he would understand is he's a former college baseball player. He is the ultimate utility player. He can go and do whatever you need. So you've really got a great hire there, Colin. Congratulations. And it really is a great haircut.
Well, and he's going to have his hands full. Kaylee, who is our law school intern up here this summer, is going to report to Colin, so he's going to have his hands full there. I told him, don't be surprised if she doesn't try and outsmart you. He said, well, we'll see what happens there. So.
That's great. Congratulations, Colin. Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and Committee. The Water Resources Bill ensures that Congress carries out its clear federal role in addressing infrastructure that is critical to American commerce, competitiveness, and protecting communities throughout the country. WRDA authorizes investments in America's harbors, ports, locks, dams, inland waterways, flood protection, environmental restoration, and other water resource infrastructure. This infrastructure is maintained by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and is vital to every part of the country. And I look around the room here from the Port of Everglades, Fort Lauderdale, Boston, Port of Boston. I know that Dallas has got some levees there that we're always, in rivers we're always concerned about. Of course, the great Port of Catoosa, which I may be the only member of Congress outside of Oklahoma that's been there 4 or 5 times. And of course, Mr. Byrne down in the Port of Mobile. So again, it affects the entire nation. I knew that Ms. Cheney was here, and I was thinking, how does it affect Wyoming? Well, the mining bit and the agriculture they have makes its way to the other parts of the state through the inland waterway system. So it really is vital to the entire economy of the United States. Again, the health of the system directly impacts how efficiently things we buy get into store shelves and how quickly goods we produce get to markets around the world. Water improvements originate at the local level. They grow our local economy, regional, national economies, and create good-paying jobs. Restoring water legislation to a 2-year congressional cycle was one of my first goals when I became chairman, and I'm proud to say we passed in 2014 and 2016, and I hope we can pass this year and get to the president's desk, the third in 3 Congresses successfully pass a water bill. Both of these measures that I mentioned earlier attracted broad bipartisan support because WRDA works. H.R. 8 follows suit, and it was unanimously approved by the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee 2 weeks ago. I want to thank Ranking Member DeFazio and Water Resources Environment Subcommittee Chairman Garrett Graves and Grace Napolitano for working with me, and the 4 of us all working together to introduce this bill. Our bipartisan bill follows the fiscally responsible, transparent process for considering core activities that Congress established in 2014. Maintains strong congressional oversight and the constitutional authority of the legislative branch. It deauthorizes old projects to fully offset new authorizations, and it sunsets new authorizations to prevent future project backlogs. WRDA also builds on past reforms of the Corps and explores new ways to deliver projects more efficiently. In keeping with traditional WRDAs, my co-sponsors and I agreed to narrowly focus this bill only on the Civil Works program at the Corps. This targeted bill serves an important purpose, authorizing improvements to water resources infrastructure that is the responsibility of the Corps to build and maintain. Preserving the civil works focus of WRDA increases the likelihood of enactment. If we don't enact WRDA into law this year, we will delay necessary water infrastructure improvements and increase project costs. I'd like to also note that our manager's amendment makes some perfecting edits as well as additional provisions relating to Corps of Engineers projects and reports. We request that it be made in order. In addition, I want to encourage the committee to make in order the DeFazio, Schuster, Graves, and Napolitano amendment to address our shared concerns with the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. These user fees collected with maritime shippers who use our harbors and channels should be used to maintain that infrastructure. We're asking shippers to honor their commitment to pay into the system, but Congress has not invested those funds when promised. Our amendment allows 100% of the revenues coming in from the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund to be appropriated for their intended purposes. So I want to thank you for your consideration today, and I look forward to being back here soon seeking a rule on the WRDA conference report.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. The work that you have done over the last few years to ensure that we move a bill on at least what I believe is every 2-year basis has really kept alive the relationship that the members have had with the Corps of Engineers, and I believe vice versa. But with that said, there is still much work to be done. Would you mind speaking with me about the issues and your viewpoint about some of the amendments that might, and some of them might have been late, that been submitted that actually perhaps have not been addressed yet with disaster? They were part of the storms that have come about. There are things that have not actually, I think, completely been vetted or completely understood. And I received a call today from the Land Commissioner of Texas Mr. George P. Bush, who said, we have a problem. We have a problem with the port, and we have a problem that was as a result of the large hurricane that hit Texas, that the infrastructure damage that resulted, in fact, would curtail or be a problem on moving energy out of the state of Texas on an international basis, meaning that this really does fall, it's germane, as best I can tell, but really not agreed to necessarily in the chief's report, but still exist. Well, how should this committee look at these types of requests, knowing that I'm sure every single one of us, including I'm sure some of the Florida requests, how would you like for us to look at these requests from a committee perspective?
Well, I think, well, first of all, when you talk about disaster relief and the reforms we made, we attached that to the FAA bill. So much of that is in there. And Mr. Cole and his committee on appropriations deal with the funding, and we've appropriated a lot of money to be able to get out there to there's Texas, Florida, Puerto Rico, and other places.
Yes, sir, I'm sorry, but it's not been agreed to by the Corps. It's lagging behind, and we'd like to perhaps accelerate some of those things because it's not on the report.
And again, those, first of all, the presidential waivers, the president can weigh in on these things to say, spend the money. To address these things in this bill, I don't know that we have the ability to, or the time, I guess is really what we have to say, to vet all these things. I think it's really best left up to the governors, working with the executive branch to move these things forward. The Corps, obviously, we've had a conference a year and a half ago, and the Corps in our Republican conference was the focus of getting these things done. Again, I think the president has enough tools and the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works to move these forward. But I think if we try to, because you have that one down there, I'm sure there are, I'm not sure, I know there are hundreds of projects.
Yes, sir.
And I don't know that we have the expertise, but I think we've given the Corps the tools. One of the things that I hope to do in this bill, which we're not going to do, but we hope we're going to study, is there is no reason for the Army, for the Civil Works piece of the Corps of Engineers to be at DOD anymore. 150, 200 years ago, even 50 or 80 years ago, the Army was the only entity big enough to do these types of projects, but that's no longer, they don't do them anymore. The private sector does them, and I think that we are I don't think the military does a great job, but I think we're ill-served on the Civil Works side because all of us, every 3 years, we get a new colonel. And the new colonel, great person, it's got 6, 8 months, a year to figure out what's happening in the Port of Catoosa or the Port of Everglades. So what we do in this bill is study that. It really doesn't need to be there anymore. And I know that Subcommittee Chairman Garrett Graves and I have talked at length about this. And look, there's some heartburn over at DOD if you're trying to do something like this. But these are the kinds of things that what you're talking about, that we've got to move these things faster. There's no reason in the world if a disaster strikes, whether it's dredging that channel to get the energy out or whatever the case may be. So, but I'm more than willing to work with any member here to put pressure on them. Just the fact that we've talked about separating the Civil Works from DOD, it's unbelievable how quickly the Corps responds to many members calling over there today. So I'd be willing to work with you, but I really think it's best left up to the executive branch and the governor coming forward and pushing these issues.
And attempting to keep the package as it is a package.
Right. Because
and attempting to then bring those, I don't mean to call them extraneous, but outside issues.
Sure.
And then letting the administration and the governors participate in an endeavor to prioritize those, to work clearly on those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I look around the Congress, there's probably 435 things, 434, that other members want to get in here, but then all of a sudden we don't keep the focus on the Corps doing a better job of getting the job done, which they've over the years haven't done a very good job.
Well,
They've been very slow.
It's respecting the process and
Right.
trying to give some bit of, I don't mean sovereignty to you, but
Right.
working on the most prioritization list that you can with the Corps as they exist across the country.
Well, Mr. Chairman, you know, there's one thing we could do, bring back congressionally directed spending.
As the gentleman knows, this committee has been tasked with that effort, and I believe we will be prepared to report out to the conference and then to the Congress, very positive attributes of a fairer way to do that.
And we
But
also-
I want to thank you for your work
Thank you.
with me on that effort.
We have to be also, the whole process, going through this process, what the budget process is, what the ratios and those things are. So we tried to hold the line to make sure we kept it as tight as we could.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I really want to highlight your work, that I think that you did focus on this, that you made it better, and you've worked with members across the board on that, and I want to thank you. I knew your father very, very well. I have worked with you very, very well, and I'm going to be, this Congress has been better because of your leadership and participation. I want to thank you, Chairman Schuster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And since you invoked Bud's name, I have to tell you, the first water bill we passed, it was 417 to 3. So, of course, I immediately turned to my staff and I said, tell me what the last time my father passed a water bill, what was the vote? It came back 418 to 5. I took victory in the fact that he had 5 people opposed him and I only had 3. But
Yeah, well, let me tell you what, those 5 people paid a heavy damn price.
sure they did.
Bud Schuster made sure there was no stone left unturned. Chairman Cole.
Well, first I want to associate myself with your remarks, Mr. Chairman. Chairman here has deep knowledge of all transportation issues in the legislative process, and the body will be much poorer when you leave. And I mean that quite sincerely. You've been a serious legislator every day you've been here. You've worked in a bipartisan fashion, every problem that you've dealt with, and you know, I think I feel sorry for whoever's going to try and replace you, because I think you will be a very, very difficult member to replace here. You really acquitted yourself well, Chairman.
Thank you.
And I want to congratulate you on this excellent piece of work and what I know is yet to come. You're right to refer to the important people. Don't think of Oklahoma as having a port. We do, and that inland water system is absolutely critical to moving produce across this country. And so I'm pleased it's getting the attention it deserves in your committee. It's always been the case, but just congratulations, and you're not out of here yet, so we expect more great work from you.
Thanks.
Look forward to it. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts.
No, I just want to thank you for your work. I look forward to supporting the bill on the floor. I support the amendment that you and Mr. DeFazio have on the harbor maintenance tax. I know it was in the original text of the bill, it was then taken out. I hope we can put it back in, and I think it's the right thing to do, but thank you very much.
Thank you. The only thing I'd ask if is we should call it a user fee, because that's actually what it is.
Okay, I'm with you.
You don't use the port, you don't
All
pay
right,
for the port.
I'm with you. Thank you.
Distinguished gentleman from Florida does not seek time. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One, Chairman Schuster, thanks for what you've worked on. I've been here your whole chairmanship when you came in, and it's been amazing to watch this process work and how it works with something that is amazing. There are very few things that unify us, and I think every member who has to deal with the Corps of Engineers is unified in needs to change category. And I think what we've worked on, and I appreciate, including some stuff like irrigation issues where they do things differently, and for us that really helped in putting it in the bill. But also it reflects, and I think what the chairman has said, and the respect that we have both Republicans and Democrats that can work on this. This is the same thing I've tried to do in judiciary. We move, things like prison reform. Let's do things that we can actually move on. WERDA is definitely one that we can. I want to just lay a marker for later on, and unfortunately, you're not going to be here to help us with this. If I had one thing in time, I think from my perspective, is someone who's lived on a Corps of Engineer lake all of my life. And one, it was the main water source for Atlanta and for the state of Georgia, and a very large water wars thing that we have going on down there, is that I believe it is now time to fundamentally change the Corps completely. You made a mention, I think, earlier in your remarks, that they stay there, especially what we're seeing right now is you're seeing a civilian cadre, so to speak, that's always there. They're sort of the history, and they're sort of like, we've been here, and we're going to do it the way we want to do it, this way we've always done it. And then you have the military who comes in. You have a colonel who come in for one base, and they're there for 18. And now it's gotten even worse because it used to be at least 3 years. Now it's going down to 18 months. Right. And they come in as a military person myself, they have to do their own things, so it makes a stamp for them. So their OPR, their officer performance report, they have bullets for it. And that's fine, but at the end of the day, it puts us in a very bad situation with our lakes, our ports, and our management, because we've really got to figure out what should the military be doing in this, and then what should we, if we're going to look at a bureaucratic kind of system, make this a lot better. And because right now it is very difficult. I have two properties, two very large lake properties, both core precincts that are within 60 miles of each other. So I have people who actually populate both. They either have homes on both, or they are the dock builders who build on both. And they're under two different managements and absolutely operate completely differently in time frame and everything else. So you have set a standard for making this happen. This is something that we as a body, both Republicans and Democrats, at some point really need to sit back and say, this is morphed over 200 years, so to speak, or especially over the last 75, to something that's not workable. I don't know about Florida, but Georgia, it's just not workable the way it is right now. And it's not that they're bad people, it's just a system has outgrown them. So the military needs to be, I think, a different part. The civilian part maybe needs to be a different way. But you've laid at least a great groundwork for those of us who hopefully want to stay and do this. I just want to say thank you for what you've done and what you've helped with me on. And it's a good bill. Look forward to supporting it, and we'll move forward.
Thank you. And I just really want to reemphasize, I said it earlier, the time has come. This is the kind of reform that we on both sides of the House should be able to get behind and say, there is no reason it belongs in DOD anymore. And it, just as you said to this point, everywhere in the country it's like that.
Well, it is, and then you also kind of get into this situation where and what I have seen, and again, this is just an honest assessment, where you have civilians, when they don't like what they have to do, they point at the military. When the military says, well, I'm not really sure, and they point back to the civilians, and then you get cross-trained when you get the Pentagon, you get D.C. involved, and D.C. wants to take over land management and acquisitions and real estate, and then they put in rules, and you're going back and forth. And one day I asked a simple question about one of our property issues that we actually put in one of the words where the locals could actually take over pieces of property and do a joint share. It took 7 lawyers from Corps over here to come to my office and explain to me why what we put into law was not what we really put into law. I think we're a little heavy on the legal department over there, okay? Because black letter law is black letter law. This is what we wrote in there. You need to be able to work with local communities if they want to do those kind of stuff. So you're exactly right. I won't belabor the point. We got a lot of other things to do, but I appreciate what you've done and continuing with that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chairman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Distinguished gentleman from Alabama.
Yes, sir. I want to thank the chairman as well. We've heard a lot of talk, and I support infrastructure improvements in this country all the way around, but these infrastructure improvements are a part of that as well. If we're going to make America the competitive economy we want worldwide, we have to have the water resources infrastructure that you've provided for in this bill. And someone that does have a particular interest in it, because representing the Portable bill, I want to thank you for your work on it, and I'm pleased to be able to support your bill. And I yield back.
Thank you very much. The distinguished gentlewoman from Wyoming does not seek time. Mr. Chairman, thank you for not only the hard work that you brought in, but the philosophy that you're able to effectively articulate that gives us what we're trying to aim at. Because if we make it too large, I think we miss. If we use the dedicated resources in a way that gets them done, and then we knew what we were trying to accomplish, I think it helps lots of people in the communities, even though there's more work than that needs to be approached.
Thank you. One more question. Colin. Okay, good.
Yeah, you're going to hear, Chairman, you're going to hear him say something anyway. Don't
I know
worry.
what happens when the room breaks up, the staff's going to get there and say,
Don't worry, I got
not
my licking on him early today, so he's not going to go without little Schuster Sessions treatment today. Thank you very much,
Thanks a lot.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Is there any other member that would seek time to speak about H.R. 8, Water Resources Development Act of 2018? If we have a member that would wish to be recognized, please know that now is the time. And any member that would wish to do this, please come on up. If this is for anything that you would like to talk about on Water Resources Development Act of 2018, the WARDA.
Go first. I'm just going to sit down.
And,
I wouldn't jump.
okay, it looks like we have 2 members that are seeking time. The distinguished gentleman from Sugar Land, Texas, the gentleman that we would like to say whenever we get a member up here that we recognize served in the United States military, the armed forces of this country. In this case, the gentleman, Mr. Olson, served as a pilot for the United States Navy. Mr. Olson, thank you, Congressman Olson, thank you for your not only distinguished service, but for the family that you protected during that period of time and now for this great country. We appreciate your service in the United States Armed Forces. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Sessions, Ranking Member Hastings, and the committee members. Thank you for letting me come here and talk about my amendment, which is Amendment 117. And I think this will be a theme of this bill. It's about WERDA and the Corps, Army Corps of Engineers. As you all know, my hometown was hit hard by Hurricane Harvey. We're still working to recover from that dramatic storm. But it wasn't just Texas, Louisiana was hit. It was Florida, the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, 3 major storms, and fires out there in California. Historic season for hurricanes. And guess what? The 2018 season started on June 1st. And we've already had a tropical storm hit the Florida Panhandle, Tropical Storm Alberto, with many floods, damages, and a couple of lost lives. If a hurricane hits Texas in 2018, we are a long ways from recovering from Harvey. We have to be prepared. NOAA recently released its annual hurricane season outlook for the Atlantic. They have forecasted a 75% possibility that the 2018 Atlantic hurricane season will be near or above normal. Congress worked in a bipartisan manner to pass the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018, which provided critical resources for our struggling communities to help make them whole again. But sadly, much of the funding work that would help our issues has not even begun with the Corps. And that's why I wrote this amendment, Amendment 117, before you today, which asks the Corps to expedite previously authorized projects, nothing new, authorized projects in declared disaster areas of Texas, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, South Carolina, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. These projects will provide critical help for those communities and mitigate future flooding and damage. Like Chairman Sessions said, I too heard from Land Commissioner George P. Bush and all 3 county judges in my home counties of Harris, Brazoria, and Fort Bend say the Corps is not nimble enough. They move too slow to help us recover. I appreciate my colleagues who co-sponsored this amendment and ask respectfully this committee to consider it in order. I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Olson. And thank you for taking time to be with us. We're delighted that you're here, Mr. McGovern. I thought that you were going to speak on appropriations, but Mr.
Later.
McGovern stepped out for a minute, so the gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And first, before I talk about Amendment Number 99 to the WERDA bill that myself and Congressman Mast have introduced, I want to associate myself with the remarks of Mr. Collins. The gentleman from Oklahoma has heard me stand up in the Appropriations Committee and declare that the Army Corps is probably the most frustrating bureaucracy that I know I've ever had to try to help constituents get themselves through, and it could certainly use some reform. So I think that's an important thing to add a bipartisan chorus for. But Congressman Mast and I have introduced Amendment Number 99 to H.R. 8 in order to solve an ongoing problem, and I am confident that Congressman Hastings joins us in this desire, that has been encountered by the Army Corps and non-federal sponsors of Corps projects. Currently, the Corps does not have the flexibility to carve off portions of entire projects for construction funding, meaning that many projects that have a part of an overall project that is shovel-ready with non-federal funds available are forced to wait until the entire Army Corps and NEPA process is completed. As an example, Port Everglades in my district, which is the port in our county is currently engaged in a $310 million widening and deepening project that would allow the port to accept the new post-Panamax-sized ships. That project was originally authorized as a whole, lumping the entire process into one project. But step one of the project, meaning nothing else can happen until step one is completed, is relocating a Coast Guard station at the entrance of the port. Until the Coast Guard station is relocated, none of the rest of the project can proceed. The port is ready and willing to provide funds and begin that relocation, but the Corps is unable to carve off and approve that portion of the project as the NEPA review for the entire project has yet to be completed. The amendment introduced by Mr. Mast and myself addresses exactly this issue. Inclusion of this discrete segment language in the WRDA bill would allow the Corps the flexibility to allow non-federal sponsors who are ready to begin construction on a discrete portion of a project to begin that construction of that discrete segment with the certainty that the Corps will later credit the non-federal sponsor for those costs, thereby fulfilling the cost share requirements of Corps projects. In the case of Port Everglades, for example, the Secretary could allow the port to begin moving the Coast Guard station and therefore beginning the entire project by self-funding and then later being credited by the Corps for that work. Now, the Corps has reviewed this language and has no issues with it, believing that the language would be applicable to all open and ongoing Corps projects across the nation. So this is not an earmark or just something that solves a problem for Port Everglades. Any decision, also it's important to note, by the Secretary to allow the start of a non-federal sponsor self-funded construction project would still be subject to a technical feasibility and environmental review. So we're not taking away any of those reviews that are required. We just are allowing the non-federal funded portion to begin. And we really need to give that flexibility to non-federal sponsors so that discrete segments can begin if we're going to address the ongoing backlog of projects that you've already talked about here today. And we have to allow the Corps the flexibility, subject to certain conditions, to work with non-federal sponsors who have all their ducks in a row and are ready to begin the initial stages of a larger project. So I ask that the amendment offered by Mr. Mast and myself be made in order and allowed to proceed to the House floor for a vote. And I yield back the balance of my time and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Does any member of the committee
Mr.
wish-
Chairman,
Gentleman's recognized.
with your permission, since testimonial offerings are being made, I do have an amendment, and with your permission, I can do it from here. And
Gentleman's recognized.
thank you very much. First, let me associate myself with the remarks of both my colleagues, and I'm fully supportive of their amendments. Mine is sort of in the same vein of the discussion that's being had here. It would streamline the authorization process for Everglades restoration projects over the next 5 years by allowing the Army Corps to begin work on projects included in the comprehensive Everglades restoration plan without seeking a separate congressional authorization for each project. And I join Congressman Darren Soto in offering this amendment, which is number 116. And it authorizes projects for which the Corps has completed the planning, engineering, and design, such as the Central Everglades Planning Project, and allows the Corps to expedite projects that would provide greater ecosystem or water supply benefits if completed sooner. Protection and restoration of the Everglades is vital to the overall health of both South Florida's ecosystem and the economy. As America's largest subtropical wilderness, it is the source of much of Florida's drinking water, an important flood barrier, and a home for wildlife, including a number of endangered species. I would urge the committee to make my amendment in order. And Mr. Chairman, just to keep the tempo of the discussion going with reference to the Corps, I disagree with Ms. Wasserman-Schultz that the Corps perhaps is the most heavily laden of the bureaucracies. She and I last week were dealing with yet another part of the federal bureaucracy, and I'm convinced GSA is the leader when it comes to that. But the Corps is a close second. And one of the complaints, and I think Mr. Collins, my friend from Georgia, highlighted the turnover that takes place. I'm now 25 years in working on Everglades restoration, and I've had 9 colonels and other intermediaries as they were moving along. And every one of them has been outstanding. But it takes them time to get up to speed. And it's just that needs to be revamped. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I appreciate the distinguished gentleman. I think comments related to the core many times are earned. I have a good relationship with them, but know that there's frustration involved. Is there any other member that would wish to engage our three witnesses that we have? Gentlewoman from Wyoming does not seek time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate you very much. If you'll please make sure whatever you brought in writing, you'd leave for awesome stenographer. It will enable her to complete the record. I need to say one more time, if there's any member that would seek to give testimony to the Water Resources Development Act of 2018, H.R. 8, the committee is now available. The gentleman from Minnesota and the gentleman from Kansas, I gather that they were here for that purpose. We're delighted that you're here. Without objection, anything brought in writing will be entered the record, and the distinguished gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Sessions, and Ranking Member and the members of the Rules Committee. Thank you for allowing me to testify in support of Amendment Number 90. It's an amendment that I am co-authoring with my colleague, Congressman Ellison. Running through the heart of the Twin Cities, the Mississippi River is a defining natural feature of our state and our region. In 2015, to help protect Minnesota's northern lakes and rivers from the spread of invasive species, navigation through the upper and lower St. Anthony Falls was suspended, and the Army Corps of Engineers began a disposition study of the lock and dam facility that was closed. The amendment before the committee today would expedite the study and expand upon this work by authorizing a study looking into modifications to the upper St. Anthony Falls Lock and Dam in order to preserve and enhance recreation opportunities for the space, as well as preserving the health of the ecosystem and maintaining portions of the lock and dam necessary to maintain flood control. I want to thank Congressman Ellison, who could not be here today, for joining me in this effort, and thank the Rules Committee for your consideration of this amendment.
Thank you very much, Ms. Paulson. Appreciate it. The gentleman from Kansas, Ron, we're delighted that you're here. Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to address the Rules Committee. Today, I stand before you to propose an amendment, Amendment Number 112, to the Water Resources Development Act of 2018. My amendment requests that the Wichita Valley Center Flood Control Project be renamed in honor of M.S. Mitch Mitchell as the M.S. Mitch Mitchell Floodway. M.S. Mitchell served Sedgwick County and the city of Wichita, Kansas, as the flood control and maintenance supervisor for the City Council Flood Control Office from 1958 to 1963. Under his supervision, the Wichita Valley Center Flood Control Project was completed. The project was designed to include a large waterway that would divert excess water around the city of Wichita. The construction of this project spanned 10 years and included acquisition of rights, relocation utility lines, as well as rerouting railroads. And it's one of the largest diversion projects of its time. Citizens and businesses, and effectively the entire city of Wichita, benefit today from the diligent efforts undertaken by Mitch. The reduction of the floodwaters within Sedgwick County has saved lives, prevented millions of dollars in property damage, and allowed for expanded growth and opportunities within the region. Mitch Mitchell passed away on March 11, 2017. Both Sedgwick County and the city of Wichita believe that it would be fitting to name the Wichita Valley Center Flood Control Project after the man who was instrumental in many aspects of this vitally important project. And one of the things that Mitch put forth when he was doing this effort was making sure that the process worked for the citizens that were affected. And in fact, all of downtown Wichita and a good portion of the western part of the city, as well as the surrounding communities, would have been affected. And in spite of some of the acquisition rights issues that he ran into with local farmers who did not want to give up their farmland, he persevered, knowing that this was a better project to accomplish. As the representative of Kansas 4th District, I support the desire of Sedgwick County and the city of Wichita to honor the life and work of M.S. Mitch Mitchell. Last year, I introduced H.R. 3383 to rename the M.S. Mitchell Floodway and was proudly joined by my fellow Kansas representatives Jenkins, Yoder, and Marshall. However, including this amendment as an amendment to H.R. 8 will achieve this meaningful designation with the passage of this bill. I look forward to the committee's consideration of the amendment, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Fine, thank you very much. Any member of the committee have questions for?
I support both amendments, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Judge. Any other questions for our members that are here? We want to thank you for taking time to come see us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other member that would seek time with the Rules Committee on H.R. 8, Water Resource Development Act of 2018? Seeing none, this now closes the hearing portion of H.R. 8. We had expected other members, and so those members may approach the committee as they choose on their own. Okay, we have now completed Section 1, H.R. 3249. We thought there might be another member that would seek time there. This now closes the hearing portion of H.R. 3249. This now closes the hearing portion of H.R. 8. And I would like to consult whether we're doing that after the next vote, which is what we had agreed to do. We have notified our witnesses who would come up for the appropriations bills that we would do that after the last vote that would be on the floor. So the committee now is in the process of making sure that we have heard the testimonies. And I would like to enter into the record a statement of administrative policy, H.R. 8, Water Resource Development Act of 2018, Executive Office of the President. And the last paragraph would state the administration remains committed to working with Congress on this legislation to address the nation's water resources challenge. And if H.R. 8 were presented to the President of the United States, his senior advisors would recommend that he sign the bill into law. So without objection, we'll enter that into the record. Is there any other information that the committee needs to handle before we go into recess? So we will come back at the end of the last vote, subject to the call of the chair.
Right all over it, and he wrote all over it.
Rules Committee come to order, and thank you very much for joining us after votes. I'm delighted to welcome two distinguished members who will be here to represent the Appropriations Committee, including the young chairman, the gentleman from New Jersey, and the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Ryan. Mr. Ryan, I'm delighted that you're here, and it's good to see you. I will say that Ms. Washington Schultz, we're delighted to have you also, and I'm not going to sit here and make that determination about which part of the bill you want to represent, but we're going to move first. So this opens up the hearing, H.R. 5895, Energy and Water Development and Related Agencies Appropriation, Military Construction, and Veterans Affairs and Energy and Water, and Ledge Branch. So we're going to move first to the distinguished gentleman who is, I believe, representing someone, but you're here under one specific part. Is that correct, Chairman Friedlinghausen?
I am. I'm here, temporary chair of the Ledge Branch.
Good, so.
Well, it is now.
Well, we're delighted that you're here, and all three of you, thank you for taking time to be with us. Without objection, anything you brought in writing will be entered in the record. We appreciate you taking time to be with us, and perhaps more importantly, Mr. Chairman, we're delighted that you've taken time. You have lots of dear friends that are on this committee. I don't need to tell you that Mr. Newhouse and Mr. Cole are two of your biggest fans, but we're going to move first to you, and we will handle this portion of the Ledge Branch first, and allow you an opportunity as you need to. We will handle those questions on Ledge Branch in the entire committee, and then we will move on, allowing you a chance because you're attempting to sub, and then you can move on if that is good with your schedule. Seems like it is. Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member McGovern, congratulations. It's a pleasure to be back with you, sitting here with Congressman Paul Ryan, my ranking member on a temporary basis. Although the legislative branch appropriations bill is the smallest of the 12 bills, it's vital to the operation of democracy. This legislation provides $3.8 billion to fund the legislative branch, excluding Senate-only items, a very small increase of $130 million above current enacted levels. Nearly all of this increase is directed towards security, safety-related maintenance, and workplace rights, training, and programs. Within this total, 1.2 is included for the operations of the House, providing members with resources they need to serve those we represent, additional funding to enhance IT, cybersecurity, support fellowships for wounded warriors, and continue mandatory workplace rights. And to protect the members and staff, the bill provides $456 million for the Capitol Police. It's been my pleasure to witness the close working relationship, Mr. Yoder with Mr. Ryan, and to obviously ask for a rule that covers this and other bills before you this evening. And happy to yield back. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ryan, are you representing this
Ledge
subcommittee, the most powerful subcommittee, as you refer to it in Congress?
I'm humbled by the power of this Ledge Branch Subcommittee.
Then if the gentleman is humbled, then the gentleman is humbly recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member McGovern. Also, congratulations on your ascendancy to the Ranking Member. I appreciate you having me here. I also want to thank the Chairman of the full committee, Mr. Friedlinghausen, for stepping in to run the Ledge Branch Appropriations Subcommittee. I'm happy for Mr. Yoder that he has the opportunity to take on the Homeland Security Subcommittee, and I'm confident Mr. Friedlinghausen will be just as easy to work with as Mr. Yoder was, so I'm thankful to have the full committee chair here. There's a lot of us here to give testimony, so I'm going to be very, very brief. The funding levels in the Ledge Branch division of this bill are generous and appropriate. There are a few accounts I would have given more to and a few I would probably have given less to, but this is a pretty good bill, and it was written in a bipartisan manner. It adequately provides for important priorities such as beginning to address Congress's ongoing sexual harassment and discrimination problem, the security of members, staff, and our constituents who visit our offices, continuing to reduce the backlog of deferred maintenance on the Capitol campus, and funding the Government Accountability Office at a level that will allow them to conduct more oversight of the executive branch. My concern about this bill is the process, Mr. Chairman, and the bigger picture. While the Ledge Branch bill has enough money, the majority plans to deprive some of the other subcommittees of the funding they need to for important agencies and programs, and many of the bills contain harmful riders that we agreed to remove from the 2018 omnibus just a few months ago. This year's appropriations process really could be entirely bipartisan because we have a budget deal that provides enough funding. It's unfortunate that we are not taking advantage of that. I hope as all 12 of the appropriations bills move forward, we can work together to produce 12 bills that can pass with votes from both sides of the aisle. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Ryan, thank you very much. In fact, it is important, I believe, for you. I wish, although I'm not trying to engage myself in any argument, it would be better if you did agree with the bill. But I do recognize that there are examples of things that happen even in our own circumstances that don't allow that. So I want to thank you for taking time to be here tonight to highlight those things, and thank you for your hard work. As you know, the Appropriations Committee has many, many good members who are devoted to not only service to this body, but also trying to help those areas in which they, what I would call, enrich the relationship to where they're better. And obviously, the legislative function that we serve in here is important, and I appreciate your attention to that. Chairman Cole?
Well, I didn't have a lot of questions because I got to sit through the hearing, but it was, as Chairman Frelinghuysen and Ranking Member Ryan suggest, a very congenial meeting on this, and I'd be remiss not to give credit to my good friend from Florida, who's actually was a former chairman of the subcommittee and has tutored endless numbers of Republicans who have passed through when she was there. So a lot of the good work that you did, and you did terrific work in this deal in terms of making the institution safer. I thought a lot of good decisions in this bill made by the subcommittee. It was clearly very bipartisan, but you're standing on the shoulders of the little giant over here, so no question who's crafted this bill over a decade really superbly well. So with that, I can just tell my friends in the committee they might disagree with other parts of this minibus, but I think if they looked at this particular portion, Lead Branch, they'd find very little to quibble with and a lot to praise. So with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. McGovern.
I have so much respect for these two gentlemen, I will have no questions.
Thank you
I
very
yield
much.
back.
Judge Hastings. Gentleman does not seek time. Is there any other member that would seek time with our distinguished panel? I want to thank both of you for taking time, not only for the year that you have spent in preparation, but also the demanding pressures that have been put on the institution, responding accordingly to the authorizing committees that felt like we needed to make our place a little bit better. I don't need to tell you also that this place, meaning the Capitol complex, which is home to millions of visitors, did require and is receiving the adequate, I believe, funding for the buildings to make sure that they continue to be safe, not only for the people that work in them, but also for those visitors that we have. And I know that this takes money. I also know it takes time, and so we will stick with you. I do not see your committee report. I had wanted to study that a little bit more in depth. I do not have that, but I will familiarize myself with that, and I want to thank both of you for taking time to be this evening. Thank you very much. If you'll please, anything you brought in writing, leave for us some stenographer. We'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move next to the gentleman, Mr. Simpson. Mr. Simpson, we're delighted that you are here. I assume that Ms. Washington Schultz is your counterpart? No. Oh, Ms. Capter, yes. Well, you're making it look good where you are. Marcy, we're going to have you come and join your young committee chairman, Mr. Simpson. We're delighted that both of you are here. Marcy, you're no stranger to this place. Mr. Chairman, you have done a lot of work. This is a big lift that every year that must be done, and I have the report in front of me and have really no questions, but I want you to know that addressing the country's needs in the way that you do, and I think the way you do it, Ms. Capter, is meaningful, and I appreciate it. The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this meeting. Making the case for brevity, I'm going to be real short and ask unanimous consent that my full comments be in the record.
Without objection.
I'm pleased to present the committee with the fiscal year 2019 energy and water bill. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank you and the other members of this committee for all the hard work that you do to ensure that a fairly fair and orderly process as we consider these bills on the floor. I'd also like to recognize Chairman Frelinghuysen and Ranking Member Loy of the full committee, and my ranking member, Ms. Capter, for their cooperation throughout this process and their support for the important work addressed in this bill. The subcommittee worked hard to incorporate priorities and interests of all members of the House. In fact, we received more than 3,000 separate requests from members, and we were able to address approximately 94% of them in full or in part. The bill totals $44.7 billion, which is $1.5 billion more than last year's level, and demonstrates a clear and strong emphasis on our nation's defense and infrastructure needs. The Department of Energy's nuclear weapons systems programs are increased by $644 million above last year, and harbor maintenance activities for the Army Corps of Engineers are increased by $200 million above last year, far exceeding the WARDA annual target. In fact, the WARDA annual target, I believe, was supposed to be 79% of the funds received in taxes were to be spent from the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. As you know, we've been trying to increase that periodically. With this bill, we are at 95% of the taxes that were taxed being spent on the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. The bill also includes strong support for strengthening the energy sector, cybersecurity preparedness, response, and recovery. Finally, the bill sends a clear message that it is time to address the long-term storage of spent nuclear fuel and finish the Yucca Mountain licensing application. I thank you for your time and attention. I respectfully ask that a rule that provides for orderly and timely consideration of this bill, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Ms. Capter, welcome to the committee. We're delighted that you're here. The longest-serving woman in the history of the House, is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Congratulations.
We're just getting started.
Well, I fail to argue with that. I will tell you that we are delighted that you're here, and the gentlewoman is not only, with exception, as you know, the longest-serving woman, but you're also a vigorous woman, and I appreciate you very much, gentlewoman's
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're always very cordial. Thank you for welcoming us and all the other members who appear before this very important committee. Chairman Sessions and a newly ranking member, Jim McGovern from Massachusetts, congratulations to you. And members of the Rules Committee, I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today with our dear colleague from Idaho, our chairman, Mr. Simpson. The energy and water development portion of this bill keeps America in the lead globally in both advanced science and nuclear deterrence against fierce and truly nefarious competitors. Our bill is essential to our national security and economic growth. Chairman Simpson has worked very hard to incorporate the interests of members from both parties where possible, and as a result, this bill reflects a range of priorities from both sides. However, the majority has unfortunately made it clear that critical priorities for our side of the aisle are undervalued, as reflected in the proposed funding levels for key programs, cuts to programs of great importance to our nation, such as energy efficiency and renewable energy, advanced research projects, the highest end of research on energy, and defense nuclear nonproliferation show that these are not the priority of the majority. Let me outline the many areas of the bill where I agree with the chairman. Largely thanks to the bipartisan budget agreement, the chairman has been able to provide increased funding levels across our bill. The Corps of Engineers, one of the most important job-creating accounts, essential to America's domestic progress and security, is a bright spot within the bill. I am grateful for the chairman's continued partnership to address the Asian carp threat to our entire freshwater Great Lakes system, as well as for funding to keep our Great Lakes ports open to shippers, which drives economic investment across that vast region. The funding for the for the Office of Science builds on the investments we made last year, and publicly funded research contributes to a strong economy, creates jobs, and ensures the United States maintains its position as the global leader in innovation. I appreciate the Chair's strong support for many areas in the bill, which are important to the nation's economic competitiveness and job creation. However, despite a generous allocation, the bill cuts over $400 million in funding from 2018 levels, principally to the Democratic priorities I mentioned earlier. Further, this legislation includes funding for a new low-yield ballistic missile as proposed in the Nuclear Posture Review. The budget amendment for this new weapon was submitted so late that our committee has had no opportunity for a full debate or even full hearings and discussion on such a vital question, something we owe to the American people before we go wandering down a path to new varieties of nuclear weapons that could bring unintended consequences in terms of deterrence. Additionally, the inclusion of several very controversial riders is an unnecessary diversion from our subcommittee's primary responsibility. While I certainly appreciate the generous allocation that was afforded to energy and water, I am disappointed that it came at the cost of other bills that contain very important domestic priorities, including keeping our air and water clean and even fighting the opioid epidemic. We had high hopes that the majority would work with us in setting the 302B allocations for all of our 12 subcommittees, is what our colleagues in the Senate were able to do, but unfortunately, what we have seen is a return to partisanship in the appropriations process. Not a good thing. Additionally, it is unfortunate that we again find ourselves taking up 3 bills at once instead of following regular order. Each bill should receive due consideration on its own merits, and Chairman Sessions, I also ask that the committee provide an open rule so that the full House can have a thorough debate on this bill and return to some form of regular order. I know you'd like that too. Finally, I would be remiss if I did not express my deep appreciation for the approach the Chairman took in the process of developing this product. While I disagree with certain outcomes, the Chairman's manner is constructive always, spiced with an amiable humor and an ability to keep the anger down in the room, despite people's strong feelings. I appreciated his keen focus on getting our work finished under regular order, and all of these qualities I am truly grateful for as we witness other committees mired in chaos and not able to complete their basic vital work. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you this evening.
Ms. Kepler, thank you very much. Your positive comments, not only about the process, notwithstanding not total agreement, is important that you see work that is being done. I do recognize, and you do too, that some of the renewable issues that have been daunting issues really across the board, not just to the Democratic Party, but to each side, came down to a priority, and I do respect the disagreement there. Mr. Chairman, you continue to see Yucca Mountain. Can you give us an idea about them receiving $100 million more, an increase?
I think if you look at it, the entire bill is what,
267.
Oh, 267 for Yucca Mountain. Some of that goes to the NRC for the licensing application, and the rest of it goes to open the offices and so forth at Yucca Mountain. This is something that we've got to solve. We need long-term storage for nuclear waste in this country. The debate has been in the past, and the law says that Yucca Mountain is the repository for high-level nuclear waste. And we have never been able to get the funding because of, for lack of a better term, politics in the Senate. And so consequently, we sit there and we don't have the funding to finish Yucca Mountain. We don't have the funding from the House side to do interim storage, when the reality is we need both of them. If we opened Yucca Mountain tomorrow, Yucca Mountain would be filled. I mean, it wouldn't be filled tomorrow, but there would be enough nuclear waste there to fill it tomorrow. We do need interim storage, and I agree with the Senate on that. But trying to get funding for Yucca Mountain, as you know, has been relatively impossible. I think we spent $14 billion drilling this hole in the ground. We need to make a final determination what we're going to do with it. I think this is the year that we can get it done, one way or the other. And we need, as a Congress, to make a determination of where we're going to go. If we're going to spend the money to finish Yucca Mountain and have that repository, or some other method of dealing with the high-level waste.
Ms. Capter, do you share in that viewpoint that there's a deal to be made between at least you and Mr. Simpson, and perhaps others in this body, and for us to come up with what we think is the right thing to do?
You know, unfortunately, Yucca Mountain was decided without any input from the senators and representatives from Nevada when it was first imagined. I don't think either of us were there on the subcommittee, so we inherited this awful monster of Yucca Mountain. And I think what we've learned as a country is that we should advertise for which communities, let them bid on a project like this. So that's actually the reality of what happened. We desperately need a place to store our nuclear waste. And as the chairman says, billions have been spent over the years, and Nevada doesn't want it. I haven't found an official yet from Nevada who's really very excited about this.
There are several.
There's one.
There's
one.
There are two people.
There's quite a few. The county that Yucca Mountain is located in is very supportive of it.
But there is, we've had testimony, we've had members come in, something this controversial, you know, you wonder, do you shove it down people's throats?
No, I don't think that is, you're right. Do you? And that's a good question, but.
Right. And we have an added problem, Mr. Chairman, because now with what's going on in the energy industry, because of competition from natural gas, it is conceivable that up to a quarter of our nuclear power plants in this country could close. And every day the problem becomes more serious, because then if we're faced with on-site storage of that nuclear waste at 25 different locations, we come to the issue of who's going to pay for that and where's it going to go? So we've been talking with the Senate, we've been thinking about other ways of trying to deal with this waste product, and right now we're sort of stalled because of the amount of money that's been dedicated to date, and we don't have the kind of unanimity that would indicate that we have a solution after having spent $14 billion.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, I would say that we had 370 votes just recently for the Shrimkus bill that directed Yucca Mountain to be opened and so forth. So, I mean, there is, every time we've had a vote on Yucca Mountain in the House, we've had 350 to 400 votes on it. So there is broad support for Yucca Mountain. Every time the Senate has voted on it, and they haven't done it for a number of years, but every time they've had upwards of 70 votes. So there is support for it. It's been politics that stopped it more than anything else. And we need to resolve this problem. And as I said, I've told the Senate time and time again that, listen, if you'll go for funding for Yucca Mountain, I'll go for your funding for interim storage. But politics enters into it, and unfortunately, it's been pushed down the road, and we need to find a solution. I think this is the year to do it.
I'm for it. If nobody wanted it, I think we might be stuck where we are. I think there are others that are willing to say, let's move forward and get it done. Yeah. But it might be another 5 years, another $10 billion, and I get that.
I hope not.
But I have not been one that wants to stick anything down anybody's throat that's like that. But it's, boy, you go visit, it's like the other side of the moon. I mean, it's in the middle of nowhere. It's in the middle of a beautiful state. Excuse me. It's in the middle of a beautiful state that I admire. Yeah. Chairman Cole?
Which has a lot of nowhere inside of it. But again, as with the previous bill, I had the good fortune to watch both my friends debate these issues when they came through full committee. And full disclosure, I had the opportunity to serve under Mr. Simpson when he was chairman of the Interior Subcommittee. I still guess I serve under him because he's the vice chairman now. He's still ahead of me. And Ms. Capter, I actually read a book recently, and that you were an important character in it. It was Richard Munson's old book, The Cardinals of Capitol Hill. I don't know if you even recall that, but you had just arrived at the committee and went through the ordeal it took for you to get through there, and the perseverance, and what a big deal it was. So your long service there is awfully remarkable, and we have good fortune of sitting with you on the Defense Subcommittee as well. So these two really, really great members. I think this is a good bill. There are some differences in it, but I think they're pretty normal, and they were voted through in committee. And I share my friend's desire. I wish we were back at regular order. I will point out that we abandoned regular order when my friends were in the majority, and we've got to make a collective decision here. We tried to restore it in terms of the amendment process for 2 years and did, but there are two problems. There's too many gotcha amendments. They're not really substantive to the bill, and both sides play this game, so I'm not saying that's a partisan thing. That's one of the reasons why we got away from regular order in 2009 in the first place. Neither side's answer, and then the members have got to decide whether they want to be on Appropriations Committee or someplace else, because we can't sit here and have hundreds and hundreds of amendments because there's just not the time on the floor to deal with them. That's all we would be doing is appropriations all year long. And I think we actually have hit a pretty good balance. This committee has tried really hard under the chairman's leadership to go through and give almost all the, what I would call substantive amendments, a fair shot on the floor and try to get rid of things that are clearly not germane to the bill or what have you. So it's a work in progress. We still have a ways to go, but my friend's commitment to regular order is the right commitment to have, and something we ought to be doing more of. And again, I think the same issues in terms of sheer numbers are why we're doing these mini buses as much as anything else. And the challenges that our friends on the other side have had. You have to remember, we got all 12 bills across the floor here in a fashion. Last year, our friends on the other side of the rotunda didn't get a single one across. And they've got new leadership and a new approach, and maybe we'll get some of them done. I actually think there's a good chance that if we can get this package across the floor, that all of you will sit down in your respective conferences with your Senate counterparts and can come back to us with a product that we could pass. Because I think that's where a lot of those compromises tend to get made now. They tend to get made a little bit later in the process in the conference committee. That's what happened last year. Everybody here, were part of the people that on the committee that voted for actually what was a bipartisan omnibus bill. 145 Republicans, 111 Democrats, and Donald Trump signed it. Something that the White House they occasionally forget, but they did urge the passage of the bill and did sign it and did negotiate it. So, Chairman, I just end with this. These are all members that know how to get the job done. I've seen them all do it, and they all know how to throw a punch when they're in a fight, but they're awfully good when it comes time to sit down and actually work together and find a common product. I have a high degree of confidence we'll do that again, and I also want to thank the people behind you. We've got a great staff on the Appropriations Committee on both sides of the aisle, and the bipartisan, if the members were as bipartisan as the staff, we would never have a problem. Frankly, if the Congress were as bipartisan as the Appropriations Committee still is, I think we would have considerably less of a problem as well. But I want to commend you for your work because it's excellent, excellent work product, and I look forward to supporting it.
Mr. Chairman, could I bring up one issue that Mr. Cole mentioned that has been kind of a frustration to me over the years and is still that way? I look at the amendments that have been offered. I mentioned during my statement that there were over 3,000 requests from members for funding levels or whatever in our bill. And we were able to address all 94% of them either in part or in full. Yes. And so someone has requested that this account go up by $10 million. Staffs work very hard to try to meet these members' requests. And maybe we've increased it $20 million because we think it's important. And the member that made the request then brings an amendment that he wants to increase it by another $5 million to the committee, when we've worked our rear ends off to try to meet the requests that the members give us. That is a frustration for this committee and for all appropriations committees.
Or members who make requests you meet the requests and they don't vote for the bill. That's my biggest
that's what I was
frustration
frustrated.
right there. And, but I agree, I don't think most members, I know in Labor H, we have over 12,000 requests. And again, we will meet, I don't know if it'll come anywhere close to your percentage, but it'll be a big number. It'll be well over half, when we try, because we do try to look through there. And I know every one of you do that as well, and make sure that, that these bills reflect not just what the Appropriations Committee wants, but broadly what the members are telling us by these conversations and requests actually think, makes a difference. And 9 out of 10 of these are not partisan decisions. I mean, most of them really are, okay, this program works, this one doesn't, maybe it work as well, or here's my idea, or here's something that affects my locality, a lot, and I know more about it, honestly, than anybody on the committee does, and here's my point of view. And I know our staff works extraordinarily hard, sitting down with members and their staff to try and find that middle ground. It's a pretty amazing process to watch work, and I think it's we're not where we need to be. We're better than where we were a few years ago. It's moved broadly in the right direction, and the members will get it back there in both parties if you'll give them a chance. So anyway, very proud of the work that the product you two are presenting. I know we'll have some differences on the floor. We'll figure out what those are and fight them out appropriately, and then send you guys off to negotiate with your counterparts in the Senate. And I feel pretty good about how the House will come out in that. Because, as I've said across the table from each of you, I think you're quite a pair to deal to. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much, gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the hard work that you put in on this bill. But I share Ms. Capter's frustration over the process. I mean, we're bunching appropriations bills together. We're not even considering them independently. I mean, there's nothing that prevents us from doing that. I mean, that's not an issue of people offering amendments. That's just everybody wants to bunch everything together. If it takes us a week to pass a bill, to try to accommodate as many members' requests as possible in terms of amendments, so be it. I mean, there are days that we vote on legislation, I think we all could agree, if not publicly, at least privately, that is not particularly important. And oftentimes we know it's not going anywhere. And, I have some policy disagreements with this bill. Ms. Capter mentioned some of them, of the cuts in renewable energy infrastructure, and, those things are very important to me. But the one thing that continues to really frustrate me are the addition of these controversial riders to these bills that have no business being on these appropriation bills. And again, there's nothing that prevents the majority from not allowing those riders to be part of the bill. And it makes it very difficult, for there to be bipartisan support when there are things on this bill in terms of riders that have nothing to do with really the subject matter. So, I hope we get back to a better process in the future, but we are where we are. And, again, all we can advocate for on our side is that our members who have offered thoughtful amendments have them made in order, and I hope that happens. So with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Judge Hastings.
I have no question.
Gentleman does not seek time. Thank you very much. Does any other member of the committee seek time? The distinguished member of the Rules Committee who has his other committee members in front of him, the gentleman also from the Appropriations Committee is recognized. Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just briefly, I'd just like to give my thanks to both the chairman and the ranking member for bringing forward a piece of legislation that I think really exemplifies the responsiveness of the committee, of the committee staff, working with individual members' requests and concerns and priorities. There's a lot of things that people bring that are important to them, and I just wanted to compliment the chairman and the ranking member for having an ear to listen and to respond and to act on some of the priorities that people bring forward. So I wholly look forward to voting for this here this evening and on when we bring it to the floor as well. But express my appreciation for all the hard work that's gone into it. I would say that this is my favorite subcommittee with the best chairman in the Congress, but my other subcommittee chairman happens to be sitting here too. So, so I won't go there. But
We know where your heart is.
Yeah. But both good places to be, and appreciate very much the hard work, and yield back my time.
Thank you very much. I think that highlights how interesting our subjects are when we get down and realize how big and wonderful our country is. And we're all trying to make our country better with limited resources that the federal government has, but still get people back home to see the value. And it is important, and I think that part of what I think, Mr. Chairman, accepted the challenge for is we got to find an answer for Yucca, because it is a daunting task. And I appreciate both of you taking time. It appears as though you've done yourself well enough to get out here early. It's only 7:52 in the evening and on the East Coast, but we want to thank you both for taking time. If you please remember that when you sat down, you agreed to leave anything you brought in writing for our awesome stenographer, and she'd appreciate making sure the record reflects accurately. Thank you very much.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate you taking your time with us. We're now going to move on to the distinguished gentleman from Round Rock, Texas, the gentleman, Mr. Carter, Round Rock, Texas. And Round Rock, Texas is home to lots of proud people. Judge, I went to college just a little bit north of there, maybe about 6 or 7 miles, Southwestern University, and went through your town on a regular basis.
And your reputation is still strong there.
There you go. Ms. Washburn-Schultz, we're delighted that you're here also and appreciate you taking time to sit through this entire hearing. I know that it's an important source of pride for each of the members of the Appropriations Committee, not only to offer support for each other, but really to get in and try and make the product better to where it serves the American people and the taxpayer in a better way. And so, Judge, we're delighted that you're here. The distinguished young gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for recognizing me, and I'm very pleased to be here before my fellow Texan, Chairman Sessions and Ranking Member McGovern, and the other distinguished members of this committee. This Rules Committee does important work in this Congress. And it's exciting and that I'm the newly appointed, when I say newly appointed, 3 weeks ago, chairman of the Military Construction, Veterans Affairs, and Related Agencies Subcommittee. I arrived at this kind of early or late post stream, and I've still got a lot to learn. But I was fortunate to serve on this subcommittee from 2004 until 10. So it's an area I am familiar with and enjoyed working in very much when I was a member on that committee. Military Construction and Veterans Affairs bill passed with 47 to nothing because Charlie Dent and Ms. Wasserman Schultz put together a good work product. So it came out of full committee 47 to nothing. The bill provides generously for our service members, our veterans, our families, and our monuments and cemeteries. Chairman Freelandhausen and Ms. Lowy have provided strong support for the bill. I appreciate their leadership and the participation of all the members of the subcommittee, and especially Ranking Member Debbie Wasserman Schultz. She and I will do well working together in the future. Continuing the Appropriations Committee's long tradition of transparency and consultation, the bill incorporates 1,300 members' requests from both sides of the aisle. And now let's talk about the numbers. The bill contains $96.9 billion in budget authority, an increase of $4.2 billion over last year's level. The funding recommendations include $11.3 billion for military construction, which is a $412 million or 3.8% increase over fiscal year 2018 level. The bill includes $10.3 billion in base funding and $921 million in overseas contingency operations OCO funding. The level is $131 million below the request. $85.3 billion for the Department of Veterans Affairs, which is an increase of nearly $4 billion or 4.8% over FY18 level, and the same as the budget request. Of the $85.3 billion provided for the VA, $71.2 billion is for medical care for the 7 million veterans. We make important investments in many VA programs, including mental health treatment and suicide prevention, opioid treatment, and prevention of homeless programs. The electronic health records and claims processing are all in this bill. $2 billion is provided as the second year of the budget deal commitment for infrastructure, including for VA facilities. $317 million is provided for related agencies in our bill. The American Battle Monuments Commission, Arlington National Cemetery, the Armed Forces Retirement Home, and the Court of Appeals for Veteran Claims. We're able to reallocate funds to provide for a second year and an additional $74 million for Arlington Cemetery's southern expansion to guarantee burial space through 2050. The bill supports our troops with facilities necessary to maintain readiness and morale at bases here in the States and around the world. It's extremely important that we get our infrastructure in shape to support the force we have now, as well as the force we want to grow in the future. In addition, the bill funds our veterans' health care and benefit systems to ensure that our promise to care for those who have sacrificed in the defense of this nation is met. We owe this to our vets and are committed to sustained oversight so that programs deliver what they promise and taxpayers are well served by the investment we make. I request that you provide a rule for H.R. 5895 that permits careful consideration of the bill, but protects the priorities we have worked so hard to maintain. And I thank you, all of you, for your consideration.
Judge, thank you very much. The words that you bring forth about the success of the committee for the gentleman who has now left Congress, Mr. Dent, is not only fair and appreciative to him, I'm sure, but it reflects a lot of hard work. Your devotion also long-term to this issue, I think, will bring fresh, good eyes to the issue of resolve. As I recall, the gentleman, Mr. Culverson, had this subcommittee chairmanship for a number of years, and it was never combative, but it was always very vigorous in our enunciation of the things that we're doing. This committee literally would become somewhat emotionally involved in the life that you live of trying to work on these issues with our issues back home, and I appreciate it very much. Ms. Washington Schultz, I recall the day you were here with Zach Wamp.
Yes.
And you and Mr. Wamp were working for a number of years. I think it was Ledge Branch.
It was.
But I've forgotten exactly. I'm not going to lose my paycheck over a bet. But
You're correct.
In one term, he was the subcommittee chairman, and you were the ranking member, and then you were the subcommittee chairman. He was the ranking member. And I recall, really with some bit of fondness, your genuine desire to work together to accomplish something on both sides, whether you sat in this chair or whether you sat in that chair. And I'm delighted that the distinguished young woman from Miami is here and you're recognized.
Oh, and thank you for your generosity in your comments. I will recount, you are correct, and you would win a bet if you made one in your recollection about Mr. Wamp and I, and And in fact, we got along so well, and this is the spirit of the Appropriations Committee, as Mr. Newhouse and Mr. Cole will tell you, that Mr. Wamp, on the first day that I managed my bill in our committee, brought me and everybody on the committee, Little Debbie's snack cakes, which were made in his congressional district. So that's the kind of camaraderie we have in the Appropriations Committee, which is really one that, in spite of the differences that I know are being
Well, this is how
expressed,
you've appeared to this committee in one member's opinion, and I respect and appreciate it.
Thank you, thank you. So I'm starting to wonder if it's something I've said, though, Mr. Chairman, because I have been through a lot of ranking members and chairs over the years, and that's the nature of the process between Ledge Branch and now the Milcon VA bill. The dearly departed, but still with us, Mr. Dent and I famously worked very well together and were able to create a bill that we should all have pride in substantively. I'm going to mention the process being somewhat, the process that we're going through here and the process it took to getting here, somewhat frustrating. So Judge Carter is in the unenviable position, which I'm sure he'll catch up quickly, of batting cleanup on a bill that he's sort of taking over in the home stretch here. But we have a lot of home stretch to go, so we're looking forward to looking forward to working together. We've done a lot of good things together, and I've been able to persuade him to come my way on a couple of occasions in full committee. So I'm really thrilled to be able to work with you. And Ranking Member McGovern, congratulations, even though your ascendancy is obviously really partially shrouded in sadness for the departure of Ms. Slaughter. So the Milcon portion of our bill is up by $241 million over last year's enacted level. And for FY19, that will adequately provide, in my view, enough funding for the active and reserve components. One item I do want to highlight in the Milcon portion, Mr. Chairman, is the new fund for enhancing security and safety. Our bill includes $150 million for enhancing much-needed force protection and safety concerns at military installations. And we've often had to really let those crop up because of other priorities really overshadowing them and eclipsing them. And this fund will allow us to be able to provide that funding alongside the robust funding that we have in our bill. We too often have access control points, air traffic control towers, fire stations, anti-terrorism, force protection deficiencies that are competing with bid ticket items, and they never make it into the request. So these are additional funds that should help the Defense Department address important security and safety shortfalls. For the VA, Title II, we $3.9 billion, which is nearly 5% increase above the FY18 enacted level. And I'm also pleased, Mr. Chairman, that the bill rejects the administration's proposal to combine the medical services and community care accounts into one enormous account. And that was a bipartisan decision. Maintaining the old structure of two accounts offers the most transparency for the committee to both monitor and control spending in these two areas. And Mr. Chairman, while I do believe that the Milcon VA division will receive strong bipartisan support, there are a couple of concerns, and this is a theme that is threaded throughout our ranking members' concerns that you'll hear from. First, I'm concerned that the funding included for community care is now inadequate to meet the needs of our veterans that are seeking care in the community. And as we all know, the VA Mission Act that recently passed will shift the choice program from the mandatory side to the discretionary side. And our recently passed budget deal did not account for this shift. In response to this shortfall, Ranking Member Walz offered language during consideration of the VA Mission Act in the authorizing committee to address this problem, and unfortunately, the majority opposed those efforts. Ranking Member Lowy has also submitted an amendment to this minibus that would deal with this shortfall. The Lowy amendment would preserve the Bipartisan Budget Act deal and prevent cuts to VA programs, which we will absolutely face if we don't deal with the problem that this dichotomy creates. It'll also hold the non-defense discretionary caps for VA negotiated under the Bipartisan Budget Act harmless when funding for the Veterans Choice Program is transferred from mandatory to discretionary accounts. It's my sincere hope that the amendment will be made in order because CBO, and this is an important an important point here. CBO estimates that the community care program will need an additional $1 billion for FY19 and at least $47 billion from FY20 to FY23. And without cap relief, VA programs, no question, will be put at risk. My second concern is that despite the calls and the really heartfelt comments I'm sure were made today to return to regular order, we are instead taking up 3 bills at once, with members from both sides of the aisle hoping that their amendments are allowed. And, you know, with respect for my friend from Oklahoma, you know, his justification for, you know, putting 3 bills together and it being too time-consuming for us to take floor time to consider them individually, what the problem with that is that it makes us unable to consider those bills individually, to consider that there might be one bill. We might have tremendous support for this bill, but if the energy and water bill drags down the whole package, then there are members that are forced to vote for or against an entire package, regardless of whether they might support one separately and oppose another separately. And that's the opportunity that each of us as members was elected to do and should have an opportunity to consider. Lumping them together so that you can kind of put lipstick on a pig is really not appropriate and not regular order. And this year, that process should especially have been better. The bipartisan budget agreement enacted in February provided relief from really what were unworkable discretionary spending caps by giving this committee a bipartisan top-line number for FY18 and 19. But here we are for the second straight year doing another minibus that will most likely be considered, I hope not, I hope I'm wrong, under a closed process. And that's extremely disappointing, and it does not have to be that way. We can establish an open rule process and really sit down and work together at managing the amendments that are introduced so that we can really get our work done. If we want to return to regular order, we have to return to considering our bills one at a time under an open process that allows each member of this body to have reasonable input. With that being said, Mr. Chairman, I request that when this bill comes to the floor, it comes with an open rule so that the full House can have a thorough debate on this package. I've been in this body when we've done that, and it can be cumbersome on some of the bills. Most of the bills, it's not too terribly bad, but it is a good process that allows each of us to fully represent our constituencies and allow for their priorities to be considered even when they haven't made it into the bill that is on the floor. That's the tradition of the appropriations amendatory process, and prior to the current majority leadership, it is the one that most consistently was followed. So I appreciate the consideration and yield back.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. Your Honor, I know that you are reasonably new in this job. You indicated that. The gentlewoman has talked plainly about moving VA choice from mandatory to discretionary. She offered some sense of disagreement. Does the gentleman have anything to say about that?
No, actually, let me say that Ms. Wasserman Schultz, on the issue of the VA Mission Act, she raised the issues of importance. The shortfall of $1.138 billion estimated by CBO is accurate. And I have, in fact, dropped an amendment, which I guess we'll be bringing before this committee later, to correct these issues, all these issues. My amendment provides for the critical funding necessary for the implementation of the Mission Act, including the new community care programs beginning in the fourth quarter of fiscal year 19. These are costs that were not known when our bill was put together. The VA Mission Act provides $5.2 billion in mandatory funding to sustain the choice program through the third quarter of fiscal year 2019, but appropriations still has to pick up the Mission Act new program requirements and the new community care program after choice ends. Congressional Budget Office has scored this funding at $1.13 billion, which is what my amendment addresses. The Veterans Community Care Program is scored at $600 million in the fourth quarter of fiscal year 19. Other new program requirements included an expanded family caregiver program of $253 million, and increased walk-in clinics, $62 million. With this amendment, we would address the needs of this bill and the funding required based upon this piece of legislation, which I believe will be signed into effect tomorrow at the White House by the president. So I'm trying to drop an amendment
Yes,
to
sir.
address the issues that, thankfully, Ms. Wasserman Schultz and I both agree, this is a shortfall that we didn't anticipate, and in an attempt to try to fix that, we've dropped an amendment.
The viewpoint that I have from Dallas, Texas is that I'm sure that there are other associated pro-veteran organizations in many towns across the country, but I will tell you that the attention of the veteran, the attention on the families, and the attention of being able to do something with it in the VA system has been very controversial. With that said, we have tried, at least in Dallas, to make a determination. We're going to support our VA. We're going to get behind them. We're going to get the VSOs to make sure that we talk with each other, that we look at each other in terms of a patient-by-patient basis. We have organizations that emanate in Dallas, one called Carry the Load, which is it's a process that's grown nationwide. We have a Performance Vault, which is a very important group in Dallas, 501c3, that is trying to cater to the veteran. And we have the University of Texas in Dallas Brain Health Center, Dr. Sandra Chapman, and the community really rallies itself in the business community, in the volunteer community, in the church and synagogue and other religious organizations community, and we're trying to get together. The loss of the number of people every day, whether it's 21 or 23, I don't know the current number, is something that is a national crisis. And I want to thank both of you for standing up for our veterans and making sure that they not only get what they need, but that we fund them appropriately. And so I am concerned about that. And when Ms. Wasserman Schultz brought that up, it tears at me too.
Thank you.
So I really want to highlight, yes, sir.
It's actually Wednesday, 2 weeks ago, that I got this change. Last week we were home, and I did at least 3 or 4 veterans events, many of which I just said, talk to me.
Yeah.
And these are heroes and educated about their lives, their needs, what's going on. They are smart. They question our actions. They question our funding. And when I came back to this amendment, I can tell you that at a veterans group I met with for lunch, the first question was, that's a great idea, when are you going to fund it?
Yeah.
So coming up with this amendment to increase this funding is, our veterans are looking to see that we're meeting our promises, and I'm proud of them for it.
Mr. Chairman, let me just, and I can appreciate, because it is a very dire problem that has been created for this committee to deal with. And Judge, I can appreciate Judge Carter's effort and the efforts of the majority to at least acknowledge that this is a problem. But his amendment really will only deal with this problem through 2019, and we still have a $47 billion hole that will force us to cut funding from VA programs if we don't deal with this with cap relief and make sure that we provide the funding so that we don't leave veterans twisting in the wind, which will happen.
Yes, ma'am, and I respect that, and as a matter of fact, we need you both to come up and give the story that you each would tell. But I would say to you that we are trying to deal with it, and at least we can say this year, we need to appropriately look at it and do it right, and I am concerned about the future. but I also, as I mentioned, know that there are lots of other veterans organizations, 501c3s, churches, or other volunteer organizations. One of them is Whiskers for Warriors, a guy named Mike Wilbur and a buddy of mine. They all look like ZZ Top. And they show up at the Dallas VA, and the first thing when they walk in, somebody says, "You getting ready to repo my car?" And he says, "No, we're here simply to pat you on the back and tell you how proud we are of you." And Mike is the first one to tell me, "I want to make sure that I'm doing my job and you are doing your job to make sure that they get the needs that are being met." And I feel like one more year, we're trying to get this done. I think I can look them in the eye, and I can look myself in the eye, and I want to thank both of you for making that easier, being on the front lines. Thank you very much. And to your staffs that are here for their insight into veterans' needs. Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a pretty important bill if you live in the 4th District of Oklahoma, and a very important bill if you live in the Cole household. I've got the largest air depot in the world, and it's expanding to take on the new KC-46 tanker. So we appreciate the military construction dollars. I've got the home of the field artillery and the air defense artillery. It's been there since 1911. We've spent over $1 billion in the last 8 years as we moved air defense artillery up from Texas after the last black round. And this committee and your particular subcommittee has been with us every step of the way. And had a father that was career military, spent the last 12 years of his life in veterans facilities because he had Alzheimer's, had unbelievably good and devoted care. And I have a brother with a Vietnam-era service disability, and he's had his dealings with the VA, and for the most part have been very good. You know, this is one of those areas I think we don't give ourselves collectively enough credit for, and probably occasionally people try to make partisan points here. The truth is that when George Bush was president of the United States, we almost doubled spending on veterans affairs. When Barack Obama was president, we've just about doubled it again. Successive Republican and Democratic Congresses have been willing to write the check. Didn't matter who was in charge. This is actually one where we tend to agree almost all the time. You know, as a matter of fact, later on, we'll have disagreements inside the Appropriations Committee because we prioritize this subcommittee. This subcommittee got more money. The reason why we did is, and that'll be a debate worth having. I mean, we probably, you know, Chairman Freeling, and we're not done yet. I mean, obviously, we still have to negotiate with the Senate, and the numbers we all know will change again one way or the other, although I think you'll be in very good shape no matter what, because I just think there's a national commitment here that is broadly bipartisan and is very deep with the American people. They want us to prioritize veterans. And then, frankly, they want us to prioritize your old home committee, Homeland Security, and they want us to prioritize infrastructure. And that was done, really, in the allocations, if you really look at what was there. So we'll actually fight later because we agreed today. I was talking to one of the other beneficiaries, my good friends on the other side of the aisle, and he was concerned about the allocations at some. And I said, well, gosh, would you like to give me back the increase that you got at THUD? Well, no, we needed all that stuff. So, look, it's just whether you're Chairman Frelinghuysen or you know, Chairman Shelby, they all have tough jobs to make hard decisions on, and they have a finite number of dollars. But this has been a priority every year that I've been in Congress, and it didn't matter if it was a Republican speaker or a Democratic speaker. It didn't matter if it was a Republican president or a Democratic president. I think the only frustrations we tend to have are really congressional frustrations with the administration of some of those dollars. We can all cite things like the Denver hospital with, you know, 4 times the amount of money that we were estimated. That's a problem in the execution of the executive branch getting its job done. But it certainly wasn't a problem in Congress being willing to write the check to make sure that, or people not telling us when we have waiting lines for people getting critical access and we have veterans dying, and we're getting false reports up from the people that ought to be coming here and telling us this is our problem, this is what we need to solve it. And I know you guys work on that issue very much and work on not just the funding issue, but the oversight issue. And I appreciate that tremendously. I want to be clear on the record. I actually agree with my friend from Florida. I would like to see us go back to single bills on the floor. Now, I will remind you, it was Democratic majority that abandoned that process, not a Republican majority. Republican majority, and they also abandoned the open rule process, which was the real key to this thing. And it's interesting to me, and again, I don't say this in a partisan sense, both leadership teams have been driven back to the same conclusion. So that does tell me, and maybe we do this in a bipartisan way, sit down and have some real rules of the road. You know, in the old days, really, you didn't put up a lot of amendments because the ranking member and the chairman, didn't matter who it was, would tell you that is not going to go. And they would back one another in that, protecting the integrity of the product that they'd created. We got away from that sometime, and we've got to get back to that because there does have to be order in the process. And again, I always tell some of my frustrated friends in Congress, if you want to be an appropriator, join the Appropriations Committee. You know, if I wanted to write the tax law, I'd try to get to Ways and Means. They don't seem to take a lot of my ideas real seriously at Ways and Means because I haven't gone to all the hearings. You know, I don't maybe know a lot about it. So, you know, we all have different areas of expertise. And while I think every member ought to have a shot at appropriations, I also think you ought to do your homework. And again, if that's where you want to spend most of your time, spend a little time trying to get to the committee because it'll educate you. But don't walk into a committee any more than I don't do this Ways and Means or Energy and Commerce. I don't pretend to know as much about what they're dealing with as they do. But everybody seems to be an expert on appropriations. And it just, again, it doesn't quite work that way. So I just, I want to end again. I don't want to give everybody a mini lesson on appropriations, although I think they need it. There should be an appropriations boot camp for every new member of Congress because they all want to appropriate. They don't all come here wanting to do energy and commerce or wanting to do Ways and Means or wanting to do defense, but they all want to be engaged in the appropriations process, perfectly appropriate. Just learn something about it before you trot out an idea and demand that it be voted on the floor, you know, in not the dozens, but the hundreds of amendments that we now see. And that is a problem. That is a problem. And the motive behind them, as opposed to sincere motive, you know, is quite often, again, on both sides, how can we create a difficult partisan vote for somebody, not how can we make the Veterans Department work better for veterans? How can we make the Defense Department more effective in defending every American? How can we make sure that at the National Institute of Health, we've got cutting research that's protecting every American from a pandemic and trying to deal with some of these awful diseases that intrude in every family's life? So, you know, if we can get back to that, I think we find we have a whole lot more common ground. But these are two of the very best appropriators that I've had the privilege of serving with. I got to serve on actually when my friend from Florida was chairman of Ledge Branch. That was the first committee I was assigned to. I never dreamed I'd come back as chairman and still be, you know, tutored as to what we ought to do. And my friend from Texas has been one of my great friends since we arrived here in the very same class and is the senior member in our class on this committee. His knowledge is just deep and wide. But we have a great committee, and by and large, we get through these processes a lot better, I think, than most people recognize. And you give appropriators a chance, they will come to a deal. They almost always get to a deal in the end. There might be some twists and turns along the way because they got to run the government every year. They can't think, well, you know, we can come back and do this tax bill next year. You don't do this veterans bill this year. You don't do this military construction this year, then all you got is a CR at best or a government shutdown at worst. So I commend you for your work, particularly in this area, and I commend you. We don't get a lot of bills even on approach out 47-0. That says a lot about the work that my friend from Florida and our mutual friend from Pennsylvania did doing this, but it says a lot about the work each and every member of that committee did because the rest of the committee was so pleased with the product and had their opportunities to offer their amendments. at the end, and, in a contentious time in a polarized age, everybody bellied up to the bar and said, this is a pretty good piece of work. I can go home and defend this at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, or Veterans Home, or Tinker Air Force Base, and in front of all these amazing people that have served our country. I can look them in the eye and said, we did a good job for you here, and we'll keep doing a good job. So thank you for your work on an excellent, excellent bill. And hopefully we'll get to that point where you can trot it out all on its own and get all the accolades yourselves, because you both deserve them. Yield back, Mr.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much, gentleman from Massachusetts.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. You've been here for a very long time, and I don't want to keep you. I just want to say one thing. We're all lamenting the process, like this bipartisan frustration over the process, but I just want to remind my friends who are in the majority, when you're in the majority, you control the process. You can open things up. We can, in this Rules Committee, we can separate these appropriations bills so they're considered independently. We can give open rules. We can make all the amendments in order. We can do whatever we want to do. Nobody is forcing us not to do that. It's a matter of whether we have the political will to do it. And I will tell you that when the Democrats were in charge, we weren't perfect. But when the Republicans took over, Paul Ryan said, among other things, that he was committed to an open process where all ideas would be heard. We've gone in the opposite direction. We are now in the most closed Congress in the history of the United States of America. We haven't had one single truly open rule in this Congress. So the trend is going toward more restriction, not toward more openness. And so I appreciate what you guys have put together. I would like to think that if we open the process up, that it wouldn't be just gotcha amendments. I think there's maybe one or two provisions in your bill that I would like to see change, but I think it's a pretty good bill. I think most members on both sides of the aisle would think it's a pretty good bill. It's too bad that it's going to be lumped together with a bill that many of us find objectionable, with all these controversial riders, and that's the energy and water bill. I don't think any of us would have any problem with the ledge branch appropriations bill. And boy, if I were in the majority, I would like to be able to, rack up appropriation bills with big bipartisan votes. I don't know, maybe that's not popular amongst the base that you guys appeal to, but I think that would show that this place is functioning. But instead, the process just makes everything very, very difficult and unnecessarily difficult. So, look, the concern we have on our side is the process. The content, what you guys did in appropriations, you deserve a lot of credit for. And I just wanted to say thank you, and I have nothing more to say. I don't want to prolong this. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Judge Hastings. Gentleman does not seek time. Is there any other member that would seek time with our distinguished colleagues? I want to thank both of you for not only your commitment to the veterans of this country, their families, their surroundings that they spend their time in, but perhaps more importantly, to trying to work to find solutions to tough problems. And I want to thank you very much. And Judge, I hope and both of you will express to your committee staff that the appreciation that we have for their commitment to excellence. Appreciate it very much. If you'll please make sure whatever you brought in writing would be available
Thank you, Mr.
to
Chairman.
our awesome stenographer. It would be very valuable. Is there any other member that would seek to come give testimony tonight? HR 5895, Energy and Water Development Related Agencies, Military Constructions, Veterans Affairs, and Ledge Branch. Seeing none, with this now close the hearing portion, and Chairman will now be in receipt of a motion from the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee grant a rule providing for the consideration of Senate Amendment to H.R. 3249, the Project Safe Neighborhoods Grant Program Authorization Act of 2018. The rule makes an order, a motion offered by the chair of the Committee on the Judiciary or his designee that the House concur in the Senate Amendment to H.R. 3249. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the motion. The rule provides that the Senate amendment and the motion shall be considered as read. The rule provides 1 hour of debate on the motion equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary. Section 2 of the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 8, the Water Resources Development Act of 2018. Under a structured rule, the rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. Rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. Rule provides that an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 115-72 shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule makes and order only those further amendments printed in Part A of the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to demand for division of the question. Rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instruction. Section 3 of the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 5895, the Energy and Water Development and Related Agencies Appropriation Act of 2019, under a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriation. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that an amendment in the nature of the substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 115-71 shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. Rule waives points of order against provisions in the bill as amended for failure to comply with Clause 2, Rule 21, except beginning on page 66, line 14 through page 66, line 20. The rule makes an order only those further amendments printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, may be withdrawn by the proponent at any time before action thereon, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in the report. The rule provides that no further consideration of the bill shall be in order except pursuant to the subsequent order of the House. Section 4 of the rule provides that the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations or their respective designees may offer up to 10 pro forma amendments, each at any point for the purpose of debate. Finally, Section 5 of the rule provides that during consideration of H.R. 5895, it shall not be in order to use a decrease in the Overseas Contingency Operations Fund to offset an amendment that increases an appropriation not designated as Overseas Contingency Operations Funds or vice versa, but does not apply to amendments between the houses.
Thank you very much. You've now heard the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma. I'll defer to myself for 1 minute. This is one rule, 3 bills. Senate Amendment to H.R. 3249, Project Safe Neighborhoods. Motion to concur on the rule. 1 hour debate. Chairman and ranking member of the Committee on Judiciary. H.R. 8, WRDA. Structured rule, 1 hour debate provided by the chair and ranking member of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. Makes an order 52 amendments, 20 Democrats, 19 Republicans, 13 bipartisan. Motion to recommit. H.R. 5895, Appropriations Minibus. Structured rules, 1 hour debate provided to the chair and ranking member of the Committee on Appropriations. Provide the chair and ranking member 10 pro forma amendments per side. Makes an order 39 amendments. This is the first rule. Makes an order 39 amendments to the Energy and Water Division, 25 Democrats, 12 Republicans, 2 bipartisan. Subsequent rule provide for further amendment consideration. Thank you for listening to me. We're now open to amendment or discussion.
We have a couple of amendments, Mr. Chairman.
Massachusetts.
I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give necessary waivers for the amendment to H.R. 8 by Representatives DeFazio, Schuster, Napolitano, and Graves, number 60, which establishes a specific budgetary mechanism to allow funds collected into the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund to be appropriated and expanded to address the maintenance dredging needs of U.S. commercial harbors. This bipartisan amendment, offered by the chairs and ranking members of the committee and subcommittee of jurisdiction, would reinstate language that was in the bill reported out of Transportation and Infrastructure, and then stripped out in the Rules Committee print. This is becoming a pattern for this closed and heavy-handed Republican Rules Committee. Last year, we saw Republican leadership strip Representative Barbara Lee's bipartisan AUMF amendment from an appropriations bill after the bill had been favorably reported out of committee. Now they have stripped Ranking Member DeFazio's bipartisan provision from the Word of bill. Republican leadership claims they did this because it violated House rules and the Congressional Budget Act, but they waived points of order for base text in every rule. Both of these bipartisan provisions were in the base text. So I don't understand why these thoughtful and bipartisan provisions were not afforded the same courtesy. But in any event, we would like to ask for a vote on this, and hopefully we can get them to have their amendment made in order.
Thank you very much. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the vote will now be on McGovern amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. Those have.
As for roll call?
Gentlemen, ask for roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins? No. Mr. Byrne? No. Mr. Byrne? No. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse? No. Mr. Buck? Mr. Buck? No. Ms. Cheney? Ms. Cheney? No. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. Hastings?
Yep.
Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Polis? Mrs. Torres? Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman? No.
Clerk will report the total.
2 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment's not agreed to, not agreed to. Further amendments or discussion?
Yeah, I have
Gentlemen.
another amendment. I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment to H.R. 8 by Representatives Moulton and Keating, number 69, which would provide additional funding for the Army Corps of Engineers Storm and Hurricane Restoration and Impact Minimization Program. The program assists communities in their effort to recover and adapt to severe weather and natural disasters. And, Mr. Chairman, from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, this amendment is germane. It doesn't violate any budget act or anything. I mean, it's totally appropriate to this bill. I'm just curious why this was not made in order.
The committee and the Rules Committee came to a discussion about what we're trying to prioritize and stick with that priority with the money and the words that we're trying to include, including the gentleman, Mr. Simpson, felt like that we had adequately funded the levels, and so that is the reason.
Well, this would be in the word bill.
It would be.
Yeah. So, I mean, did Mr. Schuster object to this?
Mr. Schuster knows that his product that he produced was an outstanding product, and when it came to delineating the priorities then that lay in funding, they did not meet that standard.
Well, again, I mean, this is an amendment to try to put, to actually put funding in it, and people could vote against it if they didn't think, and if they didn't like it. But I mean, we're talking about maybe, what, a 10-minute debate? Anyway, the Democrats on the committee strongly believe that this amendment should be made in order because it's important, and, I mean, it fits all the criteria, and so we would urge a yes vote.
Thank you very much. Further discussion? Vote now be on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor signify by saying
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, no? No.
Ask for a roll call on
Gentlemen,
this.
ask for a roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins? No. Mr. Byrne? No. Mr. Byrne? No. Mr. Newhouse? No. Mr. Newhouse? No. Mr. Buck? No. Mr. Buck? No. Ms. Cheney? Ms. Cheney? No. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. Hastings?
Yes.
Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Polis? Mrs. Torres? Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman? No.
Clerk will report the total.
2 yeas, 8 nays.
Amendment's not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion? Seeing none, the vote will now be based on the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
Ayes have it.
Ask for a roll call.
Gentlemen, ask for a roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins? Aye. Mr. Byrne? Aye. Mr. Byrne? Aye. Mr. Newhouse? Aye. Mr. Newhouse? Aye. Mr. Buck? Aye. Mr. Buck? Aye. Ms. Cheney? Ms. Cheney, aye. Mr. McGovern?
No.
Mr. McGovern? No. Mr. Hastings?
No.
Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Polis? Mrs. Torres? Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman? Aye.
Clerk report the total.
8 yeas, 2 nays.
The motion is agreed to, and accordingly, the distinguished gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall, will be handling this for Republicans,
And I'll handle it for the Democrats.
and Mr. McGovern for the Democrats. I'd like to note that the gentleman, Mr. Halpern, former staff director of the committee, has wandered up to the committee. It's obvious that they have little work downstairs, so they have to come up to pay attention. Mr. Halpern, what a delight it is to see you. You are missed, but there are many, many new faces that are on this committee, staff members, and those who, as you have known, Mr. Halpern, continue as you and Don had done, as Steve and Don do now, continue to provide this body with extreme leadership, camaraderie, and working together. And so I wanted you to see that we're up here at the task doing what might be expected. But thank you for taking time to come check on us. We appreciate that very much.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Judge Hastings?
will you give us the lay of the land for the rest of this week?
Judge, thank you. Our next meeting is scheduled for tomorrow, which is Wednesday, at 3:00 p.m. on amendments to H.R. 5895. As you know, when we opened up the meeting, we said that we would have these, in essence, two rules, ones that could come up where we could get the work started, and then the other where we're actually going to take on other amendments. I want to thank you for your question. Does gentlemen have any further question? Thank you very much. I want to thank the committee, not only for their great work, but for the late evening. Thank you very much. We've now finished our work for the evening.
Good job, Chairman.